The scorching August sun bore down on the barren Colorado plains in 1883. As Xander Adams guided his weary horse along the dried creek bed outside Ordway, searching for any trace of water that might still flow beneath the cracked earth. What he found instead was a woman sprawled face down in the dust, her dark hair matted with dried blood and her calico dress torn to shreds. He dismounted quickly, his heart pounding as he turned her over gently, feeling the radiating heat from her fevered skin even before his hand touched her forehead. She was burning up, her face flushed crimson, her lips cracked and bleeding, and when he lifted her into his arms, she weighed almost nothing, as though the fever had already consumed half of her. Xander had spent the better part of his 30 years drifting from one cattle ranch to another, never staying long enough to put down roots or form attachments that might complicate his simple existence. He preferred the company of his horse and the vast emptiness of the Colorado Territory to the crowded saloons and gossiping townspeople who always wanted to know your business. But as he cradled this dying woman against his chest and felt her labored breathing against his shirt, something shifted inside him. Some instinct he did not know he possessed taking control of his actions. He rode hard back to his small cabin on the outskirts of Ordway, a ramshackle structure he had built himself from salvaged timber and determination. The place was sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a cast iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with canned goods and supplies. It was not much, but it was clean and dry and far enough from town that nobody bothered him with questions or demands. Xander laid the woman on his bed and immediately set to work. He had tended injured cattle and horses enough times to know that fever like this could kill within days if left untreated. He built up the fire in the stove despite the oppressive heat, setting water to boil in every pot and pan he owned. While the water heated, he carefully removed her torn dress, trying to maintain what modesty he could while assessing her injuries. There were cuts and scrapes covering her arms and legs, evidence of a hard fall or perhaps a struggle. A deep gash on her temple had bled profusely, though it had since clotted. But the fever concerned him most, that terrible heat radiating from her core. He spent the first night sponging her down with cool water, changing the cloths on her forehead every few minutes as they grew warm from her skin. She thrashed and moaned, calling out names he did not recognize in a voice hoarse from thirst. "Victoria," she kept saying. "My name is Victoria." When he managed to get water past her cracked lips, she choked and sputtered but swallowed some of it down. He mixed in a bit of honey from his meager stores, hoping the sweetness would give her strength. By dawn, Xander had not slept at all. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but the woman's fever had not broken. If anything, she seemed worse, her skin somehow even hotter to the touch, her breathing more labored. He knew he needed help, supplies he did not have. Reluctantly, he rode into Ordway, leaving her alone for the brief time it took to reach the general store. The town was just waking up when he arrived, dust already rising from the main street as wagons and horses began their daily routines. Inside the store, old Samuel Morton looked up from his ledger with surprise. Xander rarely came to town except for essential supplies, and never at such an early hour. "Need medicine," Xander said without preamble. "Fever reducer, bandages, anything you have for someone burning up with sickness." Samuel studied him with curiosity but had the good sense not to ask too many questions. He gathered up bottles of willow bark extract, clean linen for bandages, a jar of honey, another of salt, and some beef jerky and dried fruit. "This should help," he said. "The willow bark is good for fever." Mix it with water and get it down however you can." Xander paid with coins he had been saving for winter supplies and rode back as fast as his horse could manage. When he burst through the cabin door, his heart lurched. Victoria had somehow rolled to the edge of the bed, one arm dangling toward the floor, and she was completely still. For a terrible moment he thought she had died while he was gone, but when he pressed his fingers to her throat, he felt the faint flutter of her pulse. He prepared the willow bark medicine according to the instructions Samuel had hastily scrawled on brown paper, then lifted Victoria's head and coaxed the bitter liquid between her lips. She fought him weakly, turning her head away, but he persisted with gentle determination until she had swallowed several spoonfuls. Then he returned to his routine of cool cloths and water, speaking to her softly, though she gave no sign of hearing. "You are going to make it through this," he told her, his voice rough from disuse. "I did not find you out there in the dust just to let you die in my bed. You are stronger than this fever. You have to be." The second day brought new challenges. Victoria's fever spiked higher, and she began to convulse, her body seizing so violently that Xander had to hold her down to keep her from throwing herself off the bed. He had seen this before in cattle with fever, and he knew it was a dangerous sign. He stripped away the blankets entirely despite the impropriety, covering her only with a thin sheet, and continued bathing her with cool water. His hands moved mechanically, motivated by a desperate need to save her that he did not fully understand. Between the convulsions, she spoke in fractured sentences, pieces of a story he could barely follow. She talked about a wagon train, about her family heading west to California seeking better prospects. She mentioned a younger brother, Thomas, and parents who had sold everything back in Missouri for the chance at land and opportunity. She described an attack, though whether by outlaws or hostile forces Xander could not determine. There had been screaming, fire, chaos. She had run, and then there was nothing but sun and thirst and the certain knowledge that she was going to die alone. "You did not die," Xander whispered, smoothing the damp hair back from her forehead. "You held on long enough. You were meant to survive this." By the third day, Xander himself was beginning to suffer from exhaustion. He caught brief moments of sleep in the chair beside the bed, jolting awake whenever Victoria stirred or cried out. He forced himself to eat the jerky and dried fruit, knowing he needed strength to continue caring for her. The cabin had become stifling despite his efforts to create cross-ventilation with the windows and door. The August heat was relentless, and combined with the fire he kept burning to boil water, the interior felt like an oven. That afternoon, Victoria opened her eyes for the first time. They were a startling shade of green, bright even in her fevered state, and they focused on Xander with confusion and fear. "Where?" she managed to croak, the single word clearly costing her great effort. "Safe," Xander replied immediately. "You are safe. I found you outside Ordway." "You have been very sick." She tried to sit up, but her strength failed her immediately and she fell back against the pillow. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "My family," she whispered. Xander felt his chest tighten. He had suspected as much from her delirious ramblings. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "When you are stronger, you can tell me what happened. Right now you need to rest and drink this medicine." She did not fight him this time when he brought the cup to her lips. She swallowed the willow bark mixture and water, then closed her eyes again. But Xander noticed that her skin felt marginally less hot, and hope flickered in his chest for the first time since finding her. The fourth day brought definite improvement. Victoria's fever finally broke in the early morning hours, her body drenching the sheets with sweat as the sickness released its grip on her. Xander changed the bedding, lifting her frail body with ease and settling her on fresh linens while he hung the soaked sheets outside to dry in the punishing sun. When she woke again, her eyes were clearer, more present, though deep shadows of grief and trauma lurked in their depths. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse but stronger than before. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Xander replied, though he knew that was not entirely true. Plenty of people would have passed by, not wanting to get involved or risk bringing sickness into their own homes. "What is your name?" Victoria asked. "Xander Adams. This is my cabin about 2 miles outside Ordway." "I am Victoria Anderson." She paused, swallowing hard. "At least I was. I do not know what I am now." Over the next hours, as Xander fed her small amounts of broth he had prepared from the beef jerky and some potatoes from his root cellar, Victoria told him what had happened. Her family had been part of a wagon train heading west on the Santa Fe Trail, planning to cut north toward California once they reached Colorado. They had made camp outside Ordway to rest the animals and take on supplies. That night, a group of outlaws had attacked, intent on robbing the families of their money and valuables. Victoria's father had tried to fight back and had been shot. Her mother had been struck down when she rushed to his side. In the chaos and darkness, Victoria had grabbed her younger brother Thomas and run into the night, but they had been separated when she fell down a steep embankment. She had hit her head, and when she came to, she could not find Thomas anywhere. She had wandered for what felt like days, calling for him, growing weaker and more disoriented as the sun beat down without mercy and her water ran out. "He is only 12 years old," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "I have to find him. He could be hurt or lost or worse. I have to search for him." "You can barely lift your head," Xander said gently but firmly. "You will not be searching for anyone until you have recovered your strength, and when you do, I will help you look." Victoria wanted to argue, he could see it in the set of her jaw, but her body betrayed her weakness and she slumped back against the pillow. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me." Xander considered the question. Why was he helping her? He had spent years avoiding entanglements, keeping himself isolated and self-sufficient. Yet from the moment he had seen her lying in that dried creek bed, he had not hesitated. "Because it is the right thing to do," he finally said. "And because nobody should die alone in the dust if there is someone around who can prevent it." The 5th day marked a turning point. Victoria managed to sit up and eat solid food, though her hands trembled with the effort of holding a spoon. Xander had shaved and cleaned himself up, realizing he must look like a wild man after days without sleep or proper hygiene. He found himself oddly self-conscious under Victoria's gaze, aware of how small and shabby his cabin must seem, how rough his existence compared to the life she must have known. "Tell me about yourself," Victoria said as she worked her way slowly through a bowl of porridge. "How did you end up here, living alone outside a small town in Colorado?" Xander leaned back in his chair, surprised by the question. Nobody had asked him about himself in years. "Nothing much to tell," he said. "I have been working cattle ranches since I was 15. My parents died of cholera when I was young, and I had no other family. I drifted from Texas up through Kansas, Nebraska, finally landed here in Colorado about 3 years ago. Built this cabin on unclaimed land and have been doing odd jobs for ranchers around the area. It suits me." "It sounds lonely," Victoria said softly. "I suppose it is," Xander admitted. "But lonely is safer than depending on people who might leave or die or disappoint you." Victoria set down her spoon and looked at him with those startling green eyes. "I understand that feeling now," she said. "Everything I had, everyone I loved, gone in a single night. How do you trust anything or anyone after that? I do not know, Xander said honestly. I have not figured that out myself. They sat in companionable silence, two wounded souls finding unexpected understanding in each other's presence. Outside, the sun continued its merciless assault on the parched land, but inside the cabin, something fragile and new began to take root. On the sixth day, Victoria insisted on getting out of bed despite Xander's protests. She was weak and unsteady, holding onto furniture and walls for support, but determined to move around under her own power. He had found some of his own clothes for her to wear since her dress had been ruined beyond repair. The shirt and trousers hung loose on her thin frame, and he had to use rope to keep the pants from falling down. She looked almost childlike in the oversized garments, except for the ancient sorrow in her eyes that made her seem far older than her 22 years. "I need to go into town," Victoria announced as she made a slow circuit of the small cabin. "I need to report what happened, see if anyone knows anything about Thomas or the other survivors from the wagon train." Xander had been dreading this conversation. "The attack happened over a week ago," he said carefully. "The sheriff will have already investigated. Anyone who survived likely moved on with whatever remained of the wagon train or headed back east, and the outlaws who did this are probably long gone." "I do not care," Victoria said, and he heard the steel beneath her weakness. "Thomas is my brother. He is the only family I have left. I will not abandon him without knowing what happened." "Then we will go tomorrow," Xander said. "You need one more day to build your strength." "And I am coming with you." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You could have left me out there. Most people would have." "I am not most people," Xander said, then felt his face heat at how that sounded. "I just mean, I could not have lived with myself if I had passed you by." That evening, as the sun finally released its grip on the day, and cooler air began to seep through the windows, they sat outside on the rough bench Xander had built against the cabin wall. The sky blazed with colors, oranges and purples and deep reds painting the horizon. Victoria sat close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and Xander found himself acutely aware of her presence in a way that had nothing to do with her illness or weakness. "It is beautiful here," Victoria said quietly. "Harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful in its own way." "It grows on you," Xander agreed. "When I first came to Colorado, I missed the green of Texas, the trees and rivers, but there is something about this land that gets into your bones. All that space and sky makes you feel small but also free, like you could reinvent yourself into anyone you wanted to be." "Who would you reinvent yourself as?" Victoria asked, turning to look at him. Xander considered the question seriously. "Someone who did not run from connections," he said slowly. "Someone who could build something lasting instead of drifting from one temporary situation to another. Someone who deserved to be loved and was not afraid of it." Victoria reached over and placed her hand on his. Her palm was warm and dry, her fingers still too thin but stronger than they had been. "I think you already are that person," she said. "You just have not realized it yet." The seventh day dawned clear and hot. Victoria dressed carefully in the clothes Xander had provided, and he saddled his horse for the journey into Ordway. She would have to ride in front of him, as she was not yet strong enough to manage a horse on her own. When he helped her mount, his hands spanning her narrow waist, he caught the scent of the soap she had used to wash with and something else, something essentially her that made his pulse quicken. The ride into town took less than an hour, and with each passing mile, Xander felt Victoria grow more tense in his arms. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be fine, but he could not make promises he did not know he could keep. Ordway was busier than usual when they arrived, the main street crowded with wagons and people. They made their way to the sheriff's office, a small building near the center of town with bars on the windows and a faded wanted poster tacked to the door. Inside, Sheriff John Walker looked up from his desk with interest when they entered. "Xander Adams," the sheriff said with surprise. "I do not see you in town often. What can I do for you?" "This is Victoria Anderson," Xander said, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "She was part of the wagon train that was attacked about 8 days ago." The sheriff's expression shifted immediately to one of concern and sympathy. "Miss Anderson, we thought there were no survivors from that camp. Please sit down. Tell me what happened." Victoria recounted her story again, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her parents' deaths and her separation from Thomas. The sheriff listened intently, making notes on a piece of paper. "I am so sorry for your losses," Sheriff Walker said when she finished. "The attack was brutal. We found 12 dead at the campsite, mostly men who tried to fight back. The rest of the wagon train moved on the next morning, too frightened to stay in the area. They headed back east as far as I know, back toward Kansas." "What about the children?" Victoria asked urgently. "Was there a boy, 12 years old, brown hair, about this tall?" She held her hand up to indicate Thomas's height. The sheriff consulted his notes. "There were several children who survived. They left with the rest of the wagon train. I do not have detailed descriptions, I am afraid. But if your brother was alive, he likely went with them." Relief and frustration warred on Victoria's face. Thomas might be alive, but he was also long gone, traveling east while she recovered in Xander's cabin. "How do I find him?" she asked. "How do I know for certain he survived?" "The wagon train was heading back to Kansas City," the sheriff said. "That is where most of the families were from originally. You could try writing to the marshal there, see if they have any record of a Thomas Anderson arriving with the survivors. But Miss Anderson, I have to be honest with you. The trail is over a week old now. A lot can happen in that time." Victoria stood abruptly, swaying slightly. Xander immediately steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Thank you, Sheriff," she managed to say. "I appreciate your help." Outside, the bright sunlight seemed cruel after the dim interior of the office. Victoria stood on the wooden sidewalk, looking lost and overwhelmed. "What do I do now?" she asked, not really directing the question at Xander but to the universe at large. "I have no money, no family here, no way to search for Thomas. I am completely alone." "You are not alone," Xander said firmly. "You have me. And you have a place to stay for as long as you need it. We can write letters to Kansas City, make inquiries. We will find out what happened to Thomas." Victoria looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me. You do not owe me anything." Xander struggled to find the right words to explain feelings he barely understood himself. "Maybe I do not owe you anything," he said slowly. "But maybe that is exactly why I want to help, because it is not about obligation or duty. It is about choosing to care, choosing to be there for someone who needs help. I have spent years avoiding exactly that, and I am tired of it. I am tired of being alone." Victoria stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, her face pressing against his chest. Xander held her carefully, aware of her fragility but also of her strength. This woman who had survived fever and loss and was still standing, still fighting to find her brother. They stayed in town long enough for Xander to help Victoria compose a letter to the marshal in Kansas City, explaining her situation and asking for any information about Thomas Anderson. They posted the letter at the general store, though Xander warned her it might be weeks before they received a response, if they received one at all. Mail service was unreliable at best in this part of the country. On the ride back to the cabin, Victoria was quiet, lost in her own thoughts. But when they arrived and Xander helped her down from the horse, she looked at him with a small smile. "Thank you," she said, "for being patient with me, for not making me feel like a burden." "You are not a burden," Xander said, meaning it absolutely. "You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay." That evening set the pattern for the days and weeks that followed. Victoria grew stronger, helping with tasks around the cabin, cooking meals, mending Xander's clothes that had gone neglected for too long. In return, Xander taught her how to shoot his rifle, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to coax water from the reluctant earth. They fell into an easy rhythm, their conversations growing longer and more personal as they learned each other's stories. Xander told her about his childhood in Texas, about parents he barely remembered, and a rootless existence that had defined his entire adult life. Victoria shared memories of Missouri, of a younger brother who loved to catch frogs in the creek and parents who had dreamed of building a better life in California. They talked about faith and loss, about what it meant to rebuild after everything you knew had been destroyed. As August gave way to September and the punishing heat finally began to ease, something shifted between them. The glances held a moment too long, the accidental touches that seemed to happen more frequently, the way they unconsciously moved closer together when they sat outside watching the sunset. Xander found himself thinking about Victoria constantly when she was not in sight, wondering what she was doing, whether she was comfortable, whether she thought about him the way he thought about her. One evening in mid-September, as they prepared dinner together in the small cabin, Xander finally acknowledged what had been growing between them. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough with nerves, "I need to tell you something." She looked up from the potatoes she was peeling, her green eyes curious. "What is it?" "When I found you that day, I never imagined." He paused, searching for the right words. "I never imagined that saving your life would change mine so completely. You have brought light to this place, to my life. You have made me want things I thought I had given up on. A home, a family, someone to share my days with." Victoria set down the knife and potato, wiping her hands on the apron she wore. "Xander," she said softly, "I feel the same way. These weeks with you have been the happiest I have known despite everything I have lost. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way I never experienced before. But I am afraid." "Afraid of what?" Xander asked, moving closer to her. "Afraid that I am confusing gratitude with something deeper," Victoria admitted. "Afraid that I am clinging to you because you saved me and I have nowhere else to go. Afraid that these feelings are not real." Xander reached out and cupped her face in his hands, tilting her head up so she had to meet his eyes. "What we have is real," he said with certainty. "I know the difference between obligation and choice, between duty and desire. I choose you, Victoria. Not because I found you or saved you, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your determination to find your brother even when it seems impossible. I choose you because I have fallen in love with you." Victoria's breath caught, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you since you first opened your eyes after the fever broke and I saw your face. You looked so exhausted and worried, and I knew you had been taking care of me at great cost to yourself. How could I not love someone so selfless?" Xander kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that spoke of promise and possibility. Victoria responded immediately, her arms winding around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, years of loneliness and isolation melting away in the warmth they generated together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am certain about this, about us. Marry me and make this cabin a home. Let me take care of you for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, but on one condition." "Anything," Xander promised. "We keep searching for Thomas. We do not give up until we know what happened to him. He is my family, and if we are going to build a life together, I need to know he is safe." "We will find him," Xander vowed. "I promise you, we will not stop looking until we have answers." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Ordway, with Sheriff Walker and Samuel Morton serving as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress she had purchased with money Xander insisted she take from his savings. A simple blue calico that matched her eyes and fit her much better than his oversized clothes. Xander cleaned up in his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed for once, his face showing the happiness that had transformed him from a solitary drifter into a man with purpose and connection. After the ceremony, they returned to the cabin that was now officially their home. Xander had spent the previous days making improvements, building a larger bed, adding shelves, creating more space for two people to live comfortably. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Victoria traced patterns on Xander's chest with her fingertips. "Tell me about the future," she said. "What do you see for us?" "I see a real house, something bigger than this cabin," Xander said. "With a proper kitchen and maybe a second bedroom. I see children if we are blessed with them. I see growing old together, building something that lasts." "What do you see?" "I see all of that," Victoria agreed. "But I also see Thomas here with us, safe and healthy. I see us finding him and bringing him home. He is part of our future too." "Then we will make it happen," Xander promised, kissing the top of her head. "Whatever it takes." The months that followed were filled with hard work and steady happiness. Xander took on more jobs with nearby ranchers, saving every penny toward building the house he had promised Victoria. She established a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the difficult soil with patience and determination. They wrote more letters to Kansas City, to wagon train companies, to anyone who might have information about Thomas Anderson. Most went unanswered, but they persisted, refusing to give up hope. In December, as the first snows began to fall on the Colorado plains, they finally received a response. The marshal in Kansas City had located records of a Thomas Anderson, who had arrived with the survivors of the wagon train attack. He had been placed with a family named Jensen, who had lost their own son to illness and were willing to take in an orphaned boy. The marshal included an address where Thomas could be reached. Victoria wept with relief when they read the letter. "He is alive," she kept saying through her tears. "He is alive and safe. We should go to him," Xander said immediately. "As soon as the weather clears in spring, we will travel to Kansas City and bring him home." But before they could make plans for the journey, another letter arrived, this one directly from Thomas himself. Victoria's hands shook as she opened it and began to read aloud. "Dear Victoria, I cannot believe you are alive. I thought you had died in the attack or from wandering in the wilderness. I searched for you for 2 days before the wagon train made me leave with them. I am sorry I could not find you. I am living with a good family here in Kansas City. Mr. and Mrs. Jensen are kind to me and treat me like their own son. I am going to school and learning a trade. I miss you and mother and father so much it hurts, but I am safe. The marshal told me you married a man named Xander Adams who saved your life. I want to meet him someday. I want to see that you are truly alive and well. But Victoria, I also want you to know that I am happy here. The Jensens want to adopt me officially. I hope you understand and are not angry with me for moving on. I love you and will write again soon. Your brother Thomas." Victoria lowered the letter, fresh tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief mixed with bittersweet joy. "He is happy," she said. "He has found a new family. Part of me wishes he needed us, wishes we could bring him here and raise him together. But mostly I am just grateful he is alive and safe and loved." Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "This is good news," he said firmly. "The best possible outcome. He is cared for in building a life, and now you can do the same without that weight of worry." "We can build our life together," Victoria agreed, tilting her face up to kiss him. "Without guilt, without looking backward constantly. We can move forward." Spring came to Colorado in 1884 with wildflowers blooming across the plains and new possibilities stretching before them. Xander began construction on their house, a solid structure with 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a living area that would comfortably hold the family he hoped they would build together. Neighbors he had never bothered getting to know came to help with the construction, drawn by Victoria's warm hospitality and the obvious love between the couple. In June, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to tell Xander until she was certain. When she finally shared the news over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, his face shining with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy about it?" Victoria asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xander said. "A year ago I was alone in that cabin, convinced I would live and die without anyone to care about or who cared about me. Now I have you, and soon we will have a child. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Victoria corrected. "You could have ridden past that creek bed. I could have died out there. But we found each other and we chose each other, and now we get to build this beautiful life together." Their son was born in February of 1885, arriving during a brief break in the winter weather. They named him William Thomas Adams, honoring Victoria's brother and giving their boy a strong name to carry into the future. William had Xander's dark hair and Victoria's green eyes, and from the moment he entered the world wailing with indignation, he owned his parents' hearts completely. Thomas came to visit that summer, traveling from Kansas City with the Jensens, who wanted to meet Victoria and see for themselves that she had found happiness. The reunion was emotional, with Victoria and Thomas holding each other and crying while Xander and the Jensens discreetly gave them space. Thomas had grown several inches and his voice had deepened, but he was still recognizably the boy Victoria remembered, with their father's smile and their mother's quick intelligence. Over the week of their visit, the two families grew close. Thomas bonded immediately with Xander, following him around the property and asking endless questions about ranching and cattle and life in Colorado. The Jensens were warm, kind people who clearly loved Thomas as their own, and Victoria found herself grateful rather than jealous that her brother had found such a good home. On the last evening of their visit, as they sat around the dinner table in the house Xander had built, Thomas raised his glass of water in a toast. "To family," he said. "The one we are born into and the one we create. To Victoria and Xander for finding each other and building this amazing life. And to second chances, which all of us here have been given in one way or another." They clinked glasses, and Victoria felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not experienced since before the wagon train attack. All the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. She had her brother back, safe and loved. She had a husband who cherished her and a son who filled her days with purpose and joy. She had a home, solid and real, built by loving hands. The past would always be part of her, the grief and trauma never fully erased, but it no longer defined her future. The years flowed by with the steady rhythm of seasons and growth. They added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Sarah in 1887 and another son, James, in 1890. The ranch prospered under Xander's skilled management, growing from a small operation to one of the most successful in the area. Victoria became known for her kindness and hospitality, always ready to help a neighbor in need or take in someone who had fallen on hard times. Thomas visited regularly, and when he turned 18, he decided to spend a summer working on the ranch to learn the trade from Xander. By then, he stood taller than both his brother-in-law and his adoptive father, strong and capable, but still carrying the gentle spirit that had helped him survive so much loss at such a young age. One evening during that summer, as Thomas and Xander repaired fencing on the far edge of the property, Thomas broached a subject he had been considering for a while. "I want to thank you," he said, keeping his eyes on the work, "for saving Victoria, for giving her a reason to keep going after everything she lost, for building this life with her." Xander paused in his work, considering his response carefully. "I think we saved each other," he finally said. "I was barely living before I found her, just existing from one day to the next with no real purpose. She gave me a reason to be more than I was, to build something meaningful. We are both better together than we ever could have been apart." "That is what love should be," Thomas said. "That is what I saw with the Jensens and what I see with you and Victoria. 2 people who make each other stronger, better, happier. I hope I find that someday." "You will," Xander assured him. "You have a good heart, Thomas. The right person will see that and recognize how lucky they are to have you." As the sun set over the Colorado plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, the 2 men finished their work and headed back to the house. They could see it in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight glowing in the windows, and the silhouettes of Victoria and the children moving about inside. It looked like a painting, Xander thought, like something too perfect to be real. But it was real, built from love and determination, and the choice to say yes to connection instead of isolation. That night, after the children were asleep and Thomas had retired to the guest room they kept for his visits, Xander and Victoria sat together on the porch they had added to the house the previous year. The night air was cool and clear, stars scattered across the black canvas of sky like diamonds. "Do you ever think about that day?" Victoria asked, leaning her head against Xander's shoulder. "The day you found me." "Every day," Xander admitted. "It was the day my real life started. Everything before that feels like I was sleepwalking through existence, waiting for something I did not even know I was looking for." "I was so close to dying," Victoria said softly. "Another hour, maybe 2, and I would have been gone. The fever would have taken me." "Do you ever think about how easily we could have missed each other entirely?" "I try not to," Xander said honestly. "It terrifies me to think about a world where I never found you, where I rode past that creek bed or went a different direction that day. But maybe it was meant to be. Maybe some invisible hand guided me exactly where I needed to be at precisely the right moment." "I like to think so," Victoria agreed. "I like to think that all the pain and loss led us to each other, that it had meaning and purpose beyond just suffering. We took the worst moments of our lives and used them to build something beautiful." "We did," Xander confirmed, pulling her closer and pressing a kiss to her temple. "And we will keep building it, every day for the rest of our lives." The seasons continued their eternal dance. William grew tall and strong, taking to ranching like he had been born to it, displaying his father's work ethic and his mother's compassionate heart. Sarah became the glue that held the family together, the peacemaker and organizer, always making sure everyone felt included and valued. James, the youngest, inherited his mother's green eyes and a stubborn determination that served him well as he fought to keep up with his older siblings. When William turned 15 in 1900, Thomas returned for an extended visit, bringing with him a young woman named Charlotte whom he had been courting for over a year. He was 27 now, a successful carpenter in Kansas City with his own business and a bright future. The Jensen family had given him everything he needed to build a good life, and Victoria was genuinely happy for him. Charlotte was sweet and kind, with a quick laugh and an easy way with the children that immediately endeared her to the entire family. On the third night of their visit, Thomas asked Victoria to take a walk with him after dinner. They strolled through the property as the sun began to set, their path taking them past the original cabin, where Xander had brought Victoria back from the brink of death. The structure still stood, though they used it now for storage rather than living space. Victoria paused, looking at it with a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. "Do you remember the letters you wrote me that first year?" she asked Thomas. "How you told me you were afraid I would be angry with you for staying in Kansas City with the Jensens." "I remember," Thomas said. "I felt guilty for being happy when you had lost so much." "I want you to know that I was never angry," Victoria said firmly, "not for a single moment. I wanted you to be safe and loved, and the Jensens gave you that. They gave you opportunities I never could have provided, especially in those early days when I was barely surviving myself." "I know that now," Thomas said, "but I needed to hear you say it. Because I want to ask Charlotte to marry me, and I wanted to make sure you knew that building a life with her does not mean I love you any less or think about our parents any less. You will always be my sister, my first family, the person who tried to save me even when you could barely save yourself." Victoria hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I am so happy for you," she said. "Charlotte is wonderful, and you deserve every bit of happiness you find. Marry her with my blessing and know that you will always have a place here with us whenever you want to visit." Thomas proposed to Charlotte the next evening, and of course she said yes. They were married that fall in Kansas City, with Victoria, Xander, and the children traveling to attend the wedding. It was Victoria's first time back in the city since before the wagon train attack, and walking those streets brought back memories, both painful and bittersweet. But watching Thomas marry the woman he loved, surrounded by both families and looking happier than she had ever seen him, made it worthwhile. The years rolled on, bringing both joys and sorrows as life always does. The Jensens passed away within a year of each other in 1903, leaving Thomas grief-stricken but grateful for the years he had spent with them. Charlotte gave birth to twin girls in 1904, and Victoria made the journey to Kansas City to help with the babies, marveling at how life continued its endless cycle of renewal and growth. William married a rancher's daughter named Emma in 1905, and they built a house on the property, planning to take over the ranch operation eventually when Xander decided to retire. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to attend teachers' college, having fallen in love with books and learning and wanting to share that passion with children. Xander and Victoria supported her decision wholeheartedly, proud of their daughter's ambition and independence. James, still only 15, declared he wanted to be a doctor, inspired by the physician who had treated his grandfather Xander when he suffered a broken leg from a fall off a horse. In 1908, as Xander and Victoria celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary, they took stock of their lives with profound gratitude. They had built more than just a successful ranch and a beautiful home. They had created a legacy of love and resilience, of choosing connection over isolation, of believing that good things could grow from the darkest soil. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "Staying here with me instead of going back east, building a different kind of life." "Not for a single moment," Victoria said firmly. "You saved my life, Xander, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live. You showed me what real love looks like, the kind that grows and deepens over time instead of fading. You gave me children and a home and a purpose. How could I possibly regret any of that?" "I feel the same way," Xander admitted. "You took a lonely drifter who thought he wanted isolation and showed him the beauty of belonging to something bigger than himself. You gave me family, roots, a reason to build instead of just survive. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Victoria corrected, taking his hand and lacing their fingers together. "That is what the best partnerships do. They bring out the best in both people." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Colorado sky in shades of purple and gold, Victoria thought back to that August day in 1883 when she had lain dying in the dust, certain her story was ending. She thought about the week Xander had spent bringing her back to this world, fighting for her life when she had been too weak to fight for herself. She thought about all the moments that had followed, the small choices and large decisions that had woven together into the rich tapestry of their shared life. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked, recognizing the faraway look in her eyes. "Everything," Victoria said simply. "The past, the present, the future. How close I came to missing all of this. How grateful I am that you found me that day." "I am the grateful one," Xander insisted. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Then we are both grateful," Victoria said with a smile. "And we have built a life worth being grateful for." Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family. William and Emma had come for dinner, bringing their 2-year-old son who was learning to walk and getting into everything. Sarah was home from teacher's college for the summer, helping her younger brother James study for exams. The house was full of voices and laughter and life, exactly as it should be. Xander pulled Victoria to her feet and wrapped his arms around her, swaying gently to music only they could hear. "Dance with me," he said softly, "like we did on our wedding night." Victoria rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling the strength of his arms around her. This was home, she thought. Not the house or the land or even the family, though those things mattered. Home was this man, this partnership, this love they had built together from the ashes of loss and loneliness. "I love you," she whispered. "Today, tomorrow, forever." "Forever," Xander agreed, kissing the top of her head. "From the moment I found you until the day I stopped breathing, you are the best part of my life." The stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, ancient and eternal, bearing witness to yet another love story played out beneath their patient gaze. In a small house on the Colorado plains, two people who had saved each other continued the dance they had begun 23 years earlier, their steps sure and steady, their hearts beating in perfect rhythm. The past had brought them together, but the future was theirs to shape, and they would shape it with love and purpose, and the unshakable certainty that they were exactly where they belonged.